establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GBNews,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6. In the next hour, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak has announced new measures to support families in the UK with the cost of living crisis. One of the benefits will see 8 million households on the lowest incomes receive a one-off payment of £650. Will it have the desired effect? A spokesman from the financial charity Turn to Us joins me next. To pay for the new support, a U-turn on a windfall tax on the profits of energy companies. Will the decision have a long-term impact on business investment in the UK? The energy commentator Malcolm Grimston will have his say. Just a matter of weeks after the government announced plans for new legislation on the use of e-scooters, debating whether to legalise them on our roads, it's been revealed the number of pedestrians injured after being hit by one has quadrupled in not very long at all. Are they safe? The thoughts of criminal lawyer Nick Freeman before 4:30. And the debate today, do university degrees give you a head start? 8 universities are under investigation by the Higher Education Watchdog for offering poor quality degrees. All this following concern that students are not getting value for money. Alongside me throughout the next 2 hours, she's doing her notes, having a say on the stories of the day. She's just looked up media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. You can look back down now. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Good afternoon. The top stories. The Chancellor has announced a new £15 billion support package to help millions of low-income households with the cost of living crisis. 8 million of the most vulnerable homes will receive a one-off £650 payment, with separate one-off payments of £300 to pensioners and £150 to those on disability benefits. The energy bills discount, due to come in from October, will be doubled from £200 to £400, and the requirement to pay it back will be scrapped. Rishi Sunak also announced a 25% temporary levy on oil and gas firms.
Our energy profits levy will encourage investment, not deter it. It raises around £5 billion of revenue over the next year so that we can help families with the cost of living, and it avoids having to increase our debt burden further. Because there is nothing noble in burdening future generations with ever more debt today, because politicians of the day were too weak to make the tough decisions. Well, the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has criticised the government for taking so long to back what she called Labour's plan.
For months, it has been clear that more was necessary to help people bring their bills down. So what took this government so long? Every day that they have refused to act, £53 million more added to Britain's household bills during this cost of living crisis. This government's dither and delay has cost our country dearly.
Well, in other news today, two more Conservative MPs say they no longer support the Prime Minister following the Partygate inquiry. More than 15 are now calling for Boris Johnson's resignation. Separately, Acting Commissioner Sir Stephen Howes has defended the Metropolitan Police's investigation of the Partygate scandal. Speaking before the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee, he said they were full of files of evidence behind each fixed penalty notice.
Many of the photographs that we are seeing look bad, and Sue Gray's report has dealt with that. We deal with the law, not what looks bad. And just because there is alcohol present, can I just remind people that the COVID regulations are about breaching COVID regulations. They're not about whether there's drink there or not.
The actor Kevin Spacey has been charged with 4 counts of sexual assault against 3 men. He's also been charged with causing a person to engage in sexual activity without their consent. The Crown Prosecution Service says the charges follow a review of the evidence gathered by the Metropolitan Police in its investigation. The alleged incidents took place in London and Gloucestershire between 2005 and 2013. To the United States, the Texas gunman who killed 19 children and 2 teachers was reportedly inside the primary school for up to an hour. Armed with an assault rifle, the suspect, Salvador Ramos, locked himself in a classroom and opened fire. The 18-year-old posted an online message just minutes earlier warning he was going to attack. President Joe Biden says he will visit Uvalde in the coming days to talk to victims' families. The Foreign Secretary has accused Russia's President Vladimir Putin of holding the world to ransom over food. The Kremlin has rejected the claims. It blocked grain exports from Ukraine, saying the West created the situation by imposing sanctions. Speaking in Bosnia, Liz Truss said pressure must be maintained against Moscow. The first cases of monkeypox have been confirmed in Wales and Northern Ireland, with a further 2 cases found in Scotland. Earlier today, it was believed the total number of cases in the UK was 79. The Public Health Agency says it's working closely with trusts and GPs to raise awareness of the disease. And the Prime Minister has paid tribute to Her Majesty the Queen ahead of 4 days of celebrations next week to honour the monarch's 70-year reign. Boris Johnson told the House of Commons no world leader had impressed him as much as Queen Elizabeth II, who'd inspired pride and allegiance within her nation.
No monarch, by her efforts and dedication and achievement, better deserves the attribute of greatness. And for me, she is already Elizabeth the Great.
Hear, hear. This is GB News. More news as we get it. Now back to Brazier.
7 minutes past 4. Welcome to you. Chancellor Rishi Sunak, maybe you saw him today, has announced plans to give every household in the country, £400 towards their energy bills. He said there are 8 million households which currently rely on help through the benefit system, and they'd get targeted support. This is part of what he had to say.
I can announce today we will send directly to around 8 million of the lowest income households a one-off cost of living payment of £650. Support worth over £5 billion to give vulnerable people certainty that we are standing by them at this challenging time.
2 lump sums in July, or 1 lump sum in July and then 1 more in the autumn. The money will be paid directly into people's bank accounts. It will cost taxpayers a total of £5 billion. It's coincidentally the amount the government today said was lost last year in fraudulent universal credit claims. Let's turn to the Head of Information Programmes and Partnership from Turn to Us, who's Michael Clark, who's in the studio. Michael, thanks for coming in, appreciate it. I was being slightly mischievous there by drawing the parallel between those two 5 billion figures. We'll come to that maybe if we have time. Are you pleased with what you heard today?
I'm very pleased that the government has recognised the scale of the problem. I mean, that's great. Though we have to acknowledge that those 8 million families have been struggling for a very long time and have been steadily falling behind in terms of the benefits they're getting. They haven't kept pace with inflation. So whilst it's good, it's a start, it's still a Band-Aid. It doesn't actually solve the problem.
What would?
I think a commitment to uprate benefits in real terms in line with inflation would help. I think benefits which were paid at the actual rate which you need to decently live on would help. We get families ringing us up so often on our helpline who are making choices between food parcels, between paying the bills in terms of feeding their children. This payment, it will help the immediate challenge they face, but there's going to be another one further down the line, so long as we're not really trying to address the full scale of need there.
Christine Jordan, any thoughts on this one? Christine Hamilton?
Well, it's going to be a long-term problem. This is a Band-Aid, I think, is a very good word for it. I don't necessarily approve of the way he's finding the money. I would have thought he could find it somewhere else, i.e. the windfall tax. But no, something has to be done. You cannot allow millions of families to fall into the terrible poverty, food banks, etc. You just can't. I mean, you remember Rishi Sunak at the beginning of COVID stood up in, I'm sure it was the House of Commons, and said, we will do whatever it takes. Well, I think now he's got to do whatever it takes, in a way, to help families. He cannot just let them wallow in...
Michael, whatever it took involved relaxing some of the stringent checks around benefits, and that's left us with a figure of £5 billion in fraud. People have made fraudulent claims against universal credit. It's a story that's not getting a lot of traction today, for obvious reasons. We're focusing on other things. I'm struck by the fact we've got the windfall tax, which has had a lot of attention, £5 billion. £5 billion has been misappropriated, stolen from taxpayers, sometimes by organised crime, sometimes by opportunists who felt they could claim a bit more. We should be angry about it.
We should.
I think that has to be seen in the context, perhaps, of... I seem to remember Reuters' story, Nobody Quite Knows, which tells its own story about the amount of PPE money which has been misappropriated by businesses. Something like 27 billion...
Well, we could angry about that
60
too.
billion.
We could angry about that
It
too.
will be really, really good to get that money.
And test, track and trace, money wasted on that.
Yeah.
The amount of money wasted on ridiculous COVID measures is, well, I don't think we know yet.
And I think it's pretty unambiguous that those sums of money, they were taken fraudulently. As you rightly say, some of that 5 billion, we don't know how much, was undoubtedly taken by organised crime. Some of it was by people who were genuinely desperate.
Yeah.
So I think the picture is probably more complicated than that, and there are far larger sums which the powers that be have been happy to waive away.
Is there another possibility? You're sort of dividing them into the criminally organised and the genuinely desperate. Life suggests there's a sort of middle group as well. I'm being slightly mischievous, Michael, but I think there's a middle group, isn't there? People who just see an opportunity to have a bit more cash to spend and take it.
We get about 100,000 people calling our helpline a year. It's part of my job to listen to those calls to make sure that the advisors are doing a good job, The people I listen to, day after day, they are genuinely desperate. They have a huge range of challenges. Some of them are dealing with domestic violence situations, which is why they've been plunged into utter desperate poverty. Some of them are making those choices about whether they feed their children or buy clothes or whether they eat the next day. So I would say that middle ground, if it exists, is really tiny.
I ask this because we get lots of emails, and I've had conversations with people over the years who get really, people who are working, often quite low-paid jobs, and you know what really gets their goat, don't you? You know what really gets there.
I think you're going to tell me.
Well, Christine, you can guess, can't you? It's people playing the system.
Oh, I see. I was thinking quite a few things would get their goat, especially in recent days. But yes, other people playing the system.
And all I'm saying, I'm not saying it's a big number.
Yes,
I'm saying to pretend it doesn't, that cohort doesn't exist is naive, bordering on disingenuous.
Well, and people who go to work.
Let him answer, Christine.
Sorry.
No, it's OK.
No?
Please do go ahead.
Well, people very quickly, people who go to work on a fairly low-paid job and they play by the system, etc., and they pay their taxes, and then they see their neighbour sitting at home all day raking it in.
Nobody's raking it in, I don't think.
Well, relatively. Getting more than they are by working.
I've got to say, I think that's one of the great kind of like big screaming headline myths. Nobody puts themselves into desperate poverty because they want an easy life. They really, really don't. People are put there by circumstance. They are put there by the situations they find themselves born into. They are put in there because they have accidents. So many people who are in that situation have disabilities. They may have worked previously, and because they are no longer healthy and able to, they find themselves there. There are as many reasons as there are people. You cannot just say, there is this group that's like that.
Yeah, no, you put the point really well. Michael Clark, really appreciate you coming in as well.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Well, there was also some targeted support for pensioners from the Chancellor.
Many people who are eligible for pension credit are not currently claiming it, which means there will be many vulnerable pensioners not receiving means-tested benefits. So I can announce today that from the autumn, we will send over 8 million pensioner households who receive the winter fuel payment an extra one-off pensioner cost of living payment of £300.
Let's turn to the Labour MP and Chair of the Work and Pensions Committee, Stephen Timms. Stephen Timms, welcome to you. You got your way, a screeching of tyres and a U-turn.
Well, I very much welcome the amounts of money that the Chancellor has announced today. I think they will help a lot. It does, though, raise for me rather some of the issues that Michael was talking about. I think we do have to look now at how we uprate benefits each year. The Chancellor's recognised that the amount being paid out in benefits at the moment is not enough. That does raise the question of how the uprating is undertaken, and also about the level of benefits that are paid. At the moment, it's the lowest level in real terms for 30 years. Arguably, as a proportion of average earnings, it's the lowest it's ever been since Lloyd George introduced unemployment benefit in 1911. And I think this kind of problem, the need to fix something like this with a band-aid, does raise the question, really, the reality is we're not paying enough.
Stephen, you mentioned what Michael Clark had to say. I'm just going to repeat part of what our conversation entailed, because I think it's a subject that's not really going to get ventilated today. And that is the fact that we had a report today telling us that in the last year, £5 billion has gone on universal credit fraud. A lot of it's organised crime, but not all of it. Happens to be the same figure that we're seeing in the windfall tax. It would be great to get some of that money back, just as it would be great to see some money, taxpayers' money, retrieved from those businesses that extracted cash during lockdown as well. But I'm struck by the coincidence. We're talking about such a large amount of money here on fraud.
It is a lot of money, and it is a significant problem about universal credit. One of the reasons for introducing universal credit was to reduce the incidence of fraud, but actually the incidence of fraud is significantly higher with universal credit than it was with the old system so far. Now, the department is saying they will sort this out, but as you say, the figure that's been published today, and this isn't just a COVID phenomenon. Now, there were problems during COVID. The department reduced some of the checks for reasons which I think are understandable. But going back before COVID, it was clear there was a real problem about fraud in universal credit, and it does have to be fixed.
Yeah, because as you know from your constituents, Stephen Timms, nothing infuriates working folk more. They understand the sort of desperate families, as Michael Clark was talking about, but they also see people, and Michael Clark rather suggested they don't exist. But you know they do exist. Your constituents do know they exist. In small numbers, maybe, but people who game the system sometimes.
Absolutely. And, people feel very strongly that it's important that the rules are kept. That's one of the reasons that people were so angry about the Prime Minister yesterday. It appeared that he and the people around him didn't think that the rules applied to them. The rules should apply to everybody. The rules about benefits, the rules about whatever it is. And there shouldn't be anyone who can carry on as if the rules weren't there.
Stephen Timms, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Christine Hamilton alongside me today. Christine, thanks for coming in today. Appreciate it. And what do we make of what is a redistributive effort by the Chancellor? It's moving money from richer folk to poorer folk. That's the overall tax effect. As a Tory, what do you make of that?
I'm not a Tory. I haven't voted Tory since 1997. Be careful.
Okay,
labels, Colin.
Labels. As somebody on the Conservative side of the argument.
Exactly. I'm a Conservative with a small c. Sorry, I've forgotten the question. What do I make? Well, unless I've misunderstood.
We're doing really well.
We're doing really well today. Unless I've misunderstood, I'm going to get one of those energy handouts for £400. Now, that's absurd, because I'm a pensioner household that is in receipt of winter fuel payments. We both get, the winter fuel payments we give to charity. I can obviously give this £400 to charity. It's not a problem. But, and I know that means testing is very costly, etc., and up to a point it's not worth doing. But it seems to me odd to give all pension households a rebate when it really should be constant. It needs to be targeted. I mean, I'm OK. Yes, our fuel bills have gone up dramatically. It costs over twice as much or something to fill the oil tank now, but, you know, I can absorb it. Whereas a lot of people who can't, and I think that money would be better directed, you know, to the lower income households.
And just on the point of principle, as a small C Conservative...
Yes, sorry, I shouldn't have let that.
It's fine, no, it's right to correct people, particularly about something so personal. Where are we left now in terms of that argument that says it's a really powerful and toxic signal that government sends out if it's saying to business, now, the profits you've made are provisional. We reserve the right to decide they're not profits, they're taxpayers' income.
I think it's appalling. I mean, you're talking about the windfall tax.
I am.
It's retrospective, and it is everything that a Tory government should not stand for. It should be a low tax economy, etc. It sends out a terrible signal to international investors, etc., that you cannot trust investing in Britain.
Another reason why you're not Tory.
And well, yeah, just very briefly, I mean, take an example of BP, who have lost, I think it's 20 billion. Figures roughly that, because of the Ukraine situation, their investment in Russia. I mean, they're going to be a massive loss this year. Yeah. Is that right?
I don't know.
I'm not saying they should be massively in profit, but it's, you know, I think it's a very blunt instrument, and I think it's a very bad precedent and could come home to roost in the long term.
OK, Christine Pineau, thanks very much indeed. Well, it's a temporary levy we were just talking about, said the Chancellor today, on the profits of oil and gas companies. The rate is 25%. Rishi Sunak said the sector was making, quote, extraordinary profits due to surging global commodity prices, driven in part by the war in Ukraine. Conservative backbenchers, some of them, said the windfall tax U-turn amounted to a victory for socialism.
Yeah.
The Chancellor said the levy will be phased out when prices return to more normal levels, and the more a company invests, the less that they will pay. Joining us now, when he's brought over to take a seat, if we can find him a seat. Oh, no, no, he's down there. He is. Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Tech at Imperial College is Malcolm Grimston, who joins me. Malcolm, welcome to you. I thought you were standing in the wings here. It looked a bit like you, but there you are. My confusion again. What do you make of this levy?
I think it was politically inevitable. In fact, it's very interesting looking at the share prices of BP and Shell. They haven't blinked. They were clearly expecting this, and investors had already, that both of those share prices are at their year high still. Christine Hamilton makes some very good points there. We need to make sure that we don't create the sort of environment where big companies feel if they come to the UK and make a loss, they make a loss. If they come to the UK and make a big profit, that profit will be taken off them. Because we can't look at it in terms of a single year. We need to look at it over the whole cycle. In any heavy capital-intensive industry, there are times when there are high prices, which send the signals to invest in the kit that will bring the prices down. There's a real danger that in taking the short-term win here, we end up exacerbating the long-term problem. And it is good that the Chancellor has, as you mentioned, increased the allowances for companies that invest. I think that sugars the pill somewhat. But on the other hand, we are in extraordinary times.
Malcolm, it sugars the pill, as you say, but will it actually persuade big oil, big gas to go to places that actually are marginal?
That's the question. BP and Shell have said that they don't intend to change their investment plans for the rest of this decade because, of course, these are very long-term investments and those monies are already committed on the basis of the profits they were expecting to make. But the question is, what do they do subsequently? And we do have a wider issue that we've never really come to terms with, that if we do want to wind down fossil fuel production, which I think we need to for environmental reasons, that means inevitably that the people who are making oil and gas at the moment, and Russia is the obvious example, have a particular advantage. And if we don't invest in new oil and gas capacity, we're in a much weaker position in terms of making a firm stand against Russia. Yeah, many years ago, we should have been building loads of nuclear stations 20 years ago. We should have been making sure that at least some of the decline in North Sea oil and gas production was balanced by new investment. We didn't do any of those things and make the investment then. I hope we're not going to make that same mistake now and not make the investment to stop the next crisis.
Malcolm Grimston, it would have been nice to see you in the studio, but it's still quite nice to talk to you this way. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks a lot. Now, a review ordered following the horrific child abuse deaths of Star Hobson and Arthur Lavinia Hughes has found that social services, amongst other things, worked from home and carried out virtual visits over FaceTime. The Child Safeguarding Practice Review panel said the way child protection is approached, at least in England, needs to, quote, change fundamentally. Its experts concluded that dedicated child protection teams made up of experienced police, healthcare staff and social workers should be set up in every council area to prevent similar tragedies from happening. Well, a partner in abuse team at Hugh James Solicitors is Alan Collins, who's been kind enough to come into the studio. Alan, appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.
Part of the problem in both these particular cases was that social workers were just going through that revolving door. They didn't get to know the case, they didn't necessarily get to know the community or the family. And that's a function of what a wretched job for many social workers, the job that they're having to do actually is.
It is a tough job being a social worker. I do not envy the work that they have to undertake. But at the end of the day, society has a responsibility towards the vulnerable, and in this situation, vulnerable children. And we have seen too many tragic cases over the years where vulnerable children have been killed, often by people in their family. And whilst we have to recognise what a tough job it is, we also have to accept that there are repeated failings. And if they're not addressed, then we'll have more tragic disasters.
And when those failings happen, and when you get a tragic death, the reaction often is to say, OK, the bar at which we decide a child has to be taken from their parents or their guardians is lowered, and the child is then put into care. We were discussing it last week, what a terrible outcome that is for getting on for 100,000 young people in Britain to go into care. It's a nightmare. Just on the separate point I raised there, about lockdown and working from home and using FaceTime and Zoom to meet parents rather than physically going in. How much of that do you think was a problem here?
It's an issue. There was some interesting research from, I think it was the University of New South Wales, looking at the police in Australia and the UK, and lockdown resulting in police officers having to work from home did pose a problem. But we shouldn't allow that to cloud our judgment, because these problems go back, they're systemic problems that go back years, if not decades. So whilst we recognise that working from home is an issue, we should not allow that to cloud the other issues.
Christine Hamilton, you and I have seen the media up close for years and have seen these witch hunts. I would describe them as witch hunts against social workers. What a tough job that they do.
I'm not sure I would describe it as a witch hunt. I mean, the saga that has been unfolded in the case of these two children is absolutely appalling. And I think I'm right, you obviously know whether this is true or not, that the last social worker to physically see Star, that was the first time she had seen Star, and she left the service the next week. Now, I understand they have recruitment problems, etc., but that cannot be good enough. And how can you possibly assess, without actually seeing somebody, whether a complaint is malicious, which is what the mother and her partner kept saying, oh, these are just malicious complaints. How can you judge that on a Zoom call? It's too easy to camouflage things.
Indeed, I agree with you, Christine. And one of the issues that we see time and time again, not only in these two cases, but in other cases which perhaps don't get the publicity that they deserve, is that there are warnings. These children are sort of on the radar because concerned family members, members of the public, will phone in and say, I'm worried about this particular child because of, and they may be heard, but they're not listened to. And that's the fundamental difference. People are not listened to who have key information that might make all the difference.
And also in the case, not of Star, because I imagine she was too young, but older children, they weren't going to school, so they weren't getting the school teachers, not interfering, but seeing the signals and the signs. So that could have let more people through.
Alan, how do you get people to go to social work? I mean, I take what Christine's saying, and maybe witch hunt's not necessarily the right word, but I'm struggling to find a job in Britain today, with the possible exception of working in the prison service, which is unadulteratingly tough. I mean, even in the police, there are good days and bad. In the NHS, you get clapped during lockdown. Social working is unremittingly grim. How do we get people into it?
Because you do see good outcomes where it does work. And I was talking to someone who went through the care system, and she's immensely grateful for the support that she received from her social workers, because through the support that they provided, she was able to get into education and go to university and become a medical professional. Were it not for a particular social worker.
There you go. You can turn lives around.
We only see the bad ones. We don't see the mountains of good work that the social workers do, which you've just highlighted. It's only the horror stories that we know about.
Alan, thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
It. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we'll bring you through the rest of the day's news. We'll discuss our debate today. University, is it still worth it? It's a debate we've had before. We're going to have it again. We'll take a short break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. The top stories on GB News. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has announced a £5 billion tax on oil and gas companies to help families struggling through the cost of living crisis. Every household is going to receive £400 discount off their energy bills, which won't need to be repaid. The lowest income earners will be given £650 in 2 lump sums in July and in the autumn. Pensioners will receive a one-off payment of £300. And in September, 6 million people on disability benefits will receive a payment of £150.
I know things are difficult and people are worried about the next few months. That's why we've announced today £15 billion of new support to help with the cost of living. And I'm focused on delivering for people, and that's what today was about. And the timing of today is because we now have more clarity about what's going to happen to energy bills in the autumn. We heard from Ofgem earlier this week about the potential scale of the increase, and that's why we took decisive action to provide £15 billion worth of support to help the country get through the challenging months ahead.
Well, the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves criticised the government for taking so long to back what she called Labour's plan.
For months, it has been clear that more was necessary to help people bring their bills down. So what took this government so long? Every day that they have refused to act, £53 million more added to Britain's household bills during this cost of living crisis. This government's dither and delay has cost our country dearly.
Well, in other news today, the actor Kevin Spacey has been charged with 4 counts of sexual assault against 3 men. He's also been charged with causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. The Crown Prosecution Service says the charges follow a review of the evidence gathered by the Metropolitan Police in its investigation. And the first cases of monkeypox have been confirmed in Wales and Northern Ireland, with a further 2 cases found in Scotland. Earlier today, it was believed the total number of cases in the UK was 79. The Public Health Agency says it's working closely with trusts and GPs to raise awareness of the disease. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. And now, here's Colin Brazier.
Just a few weeks ago, the government confirmed its new transport bill will include rules to expand the legal use of e-scooters on our roads. But today, a pretty stark warning, really, on the dangers they could pose to pedestrians. The Department for Transport released figures suggesting the number of people injured after being hit by an e-scooter was nearly 4 times higher in 2021 than the year before. Currently, private e-scooters, we've taken you around these houses before, haven't we? Currently, private e-scooters are banned from being used on public roads, although there is a number of rental schemes in use across the UK. And of course, if you've got your own e-scooter, you can use it on private land. In other words, you can drive it up and down, ride it up and down your drive. But in theory, nowhere else. How many people do that? We're joined by a solicitor at Freeman & Co., the eponymous Nick Freeman, who specialises in traffic and speeding offences. Nick, welcome to you. A quadrupling. I'm surprised it's that low.
Yes, I suspect it's a lot higher, and we just haven't got the accurate statistics, to be quite honest with you. I'm sure that more than 1,000 people, they're suggesting about 1,000 people, just over 1,000 people were injured last year, either injured or fatally injured. I'm quite confident it's considerably more than that, but these are the statistics that are available. We're not surprised by them, and they're going to rise massively unless there is new legislation and it's enforced. And that's the problem. We don't exactly know what this legislation is going to be.
And in terms of those people who are being hit, I'm guessing disproportionately the visually impaired, the elderly.
Yep. It can be anybody, because look, you know, if you are impaired from a hearing perspective, I mean, no one hears an e-scooter because they're silent, they're stealth. So if they're on the pavement, and of course they shouldn't be, then they might knock you. They're going to probably approach you from behind. It might not necessarily be in connection with the commission of crime. There's no figures in relation to that, but you're not going to hear them. So we need there is legislation in place, but it's redundant because we don't know who's on them at any stage. So what we do need, one of the first things we need, is identification plates in the same way that we have for motor cars, registration plates. So at least there will be some means of identifying, tracking the owner. With that, there should be a degree of responsibility. But in my view, we also need to extend the legislation. The Road Traffic Act currently applies, as it does to cars, to e-scooters. But then the government, in June of 2020, removed the mandatory requirement to wear helmets. In my view, that needs to be reinstated as a mandatory requirement. And we know that private e-scooters are coming. They need to be limited in terms of speed. You know, at the moment, they can go up to 68 miles an hour. In my view, that speed needs to be cut drastically. And it needs to be enforced. We need specific legislation in terms of use on the pavements. I know it's outlawed, but how are we going to enforce it? You know, the police aren't there, they're busy doing other stuff. How is it going to be enforced? We're probably going to end up with cameras in the same way that we have on motorways, cameras on the pavements to deal with these things, because otherwise, at the moment, we've got something like 750,000 private e-scooters on a road. It's going to rise massively, and they're out of control. And without legislation, without enforcement, it's going to continue.
And, you know, I apologise to our viewers and I apologise to our listeners because you couldn't see the pictures. We were running pictures of rental scooters. Nick Freeman, you were talking about identification. And that's all fine. That's all hunky-dory. When they're rented, you put your credit card details in. The renters know precisely who you are. But that's on the legal side of things. Meanwhile, there's the Wild West, which is growing rapidly, and people are buying these scooters. They go to Halfords, they hand them over. I mean, this seems crazy. And yet, you know, clearly everybody's kind of in cahoots on this. That we know when you sell privately a scooter, the chances of that scooter being used, as the law suggests it can be, in your garden, for heaven's sake, it ain't going to happen.
Or private estate. I don't think many purchasers of e-scooters have private estates. You know, to go 68 miles an hour. You just go into any city, wherever you go, you see them. They're inevitably on the pavement. They're illegal. The police need to be there. They need to be seizing them. They do cost money. And if the police seize them, if you have a police presence, excuse me, thank you very much, I'm having that. By the way, you're going to have 6 points on your licence. You're going to be fined. You're not going to see this again.
Nick, I've got to stop you because otherwise Christine Hamilton won't get a word and then we're both in trouble. Nick, thanks very much indeed.
That would never do.
It would never do. Christine?
Honestly, now Nick will be blaming me. That's absurd. I don't mind if I never get a word in edgeways. That was so interesting. I don't think bicycles even have registration plates, do they? So they're not. Let us know if they have. I've never seen a registration plate on a bicycle. So if they're not registered, how on earth are we going to get... I think they're an absolute menace. I fully understand the attraction of them. I can see why they appeal. But I think they're an absolute menace. And the very least we can do is control them and register who they are and who's got them. 68 miles an hour on something when you've got one leg in front of the other like that, you're deeply unstable. I mean, it's the most... like a child... At least a child on a scooter has got one foot on the ground pushing it along.
I think, to be fair, the rental ones are capped at 15 miles an hour. I think 68 may be at the very extreme end. Christine, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up here, what have we got? We've got the Brazier angle for you, my thoughts on the Archbishop of Canterbury. He had something to say about the Sue Gray Partygate report. Was he right too? We'll talk about that. Also, do university degrees give you a head start in life? 8 universities are under investigation by the Higher Education Watchdog for offering poor quality degrees. Discussing that in a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
In the late 500s, a holy man was sent from Rome to help save the English. He was called Augustine, and his mission was a roaring success. He converted the pagan king to Christianity and founded Canterbury Cathedral. He died on this day in the year 604. And this morning, a millennium and a half later, the papers carry a story about Augustine's successor, Justin Welby, the 105th Archbishop of Canterbury, whose unhappy job it is to manage the decline of an institution once famously known as the Conservative Party at prayer. How hollow that joke now rings, at least if you're Boris Johnson. In a tweet republished in the papers today, Archbishop Welby wrote, "Sue Gray's report shows that culture, behaviour and standards in public life really matter. We need to be able to trust our national institutions." This is the same Justin Welby whose church recently stopped my GBNews colleague Calvin Robinson from becoming a priest. Calvin's heresy, as many of you will know, is that he won't kneel down before BLM, doesn't believe in the creed of identity politics, and as a black man, refuses to accept that being born white is somehow a sin. In Mark's Gospel, Jesus is reported to have said that we should render unto God what is due to God and give to Caesar what is due to Caesar. As with many biblical quotations, someone somewhere right now is arguing about precisely what that means, but it's often cited by those who think the church should keep its nose out of politics. Well, Welby obviously reads it differently, and if he wades into politics, a notoriously rough trade, he can't expect people to play nice with him, so we won't. In his tweet, Welby says we need to be able to trust our national institutions, so then a question. If you're one of the 850,000 Anglicans who goes to church every week, do you trust your boss? Some pictures. We start in Kent, where Augustine arrived in the 500s. What would Augustine have made of Rochester Cathedral, installing, well, you know what's coming, don't you? A crazy golf course in its nave. You obviously have to try to do something when congregations are dwindling, but really. The crazy golf came in 2019, just before COVID struck, and the Church of England's response to coronavirus was arguably crazier still. Churches were closed over Easter, and the Archbishop took a 3-month-long spiritual sabbatical. Nobody should have to die for their faith, but was it really necessary for the Archbishop to go along quite so compliantly with lockdown? Of course, the truth is that Welby exemplifies the ideological capture of what we once called the establishment. He epitomises a Brahmin caste which routinely and gratuitously ignores the values of ordinary folk, or what the Church would call the laity. No longer is the Church of England the Conservative Party at prayer. It's not even the Green Party at prayer, though the Anglican I interviewed a few years ago, who'd avoided having children to save the planet, suggested otherwise. And it was Welby who had to apologise at COP26 for saying climate change was like the Holocaust, but worse. No, the Church of England is a holy joke. It's fallen to what another Italian, not Augustine, but Antonio, the Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci, called the slow march through the institutions. So I'll end with another picture and some words from someone who puts it rather better than I could. Well, the photograph, it's of Amiens Cathedral in World War I, defended at the time by British soldiers, and with sandbags, not crazy golf, in the nave, to protect a congregation so devout that not even German bombs could stop communion. And the words? From Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold, who wrote them not far from where Augustine landed to claim the English for Christianity. The Victorian poet lamented the retreat of religion and likened it to the sea with its melancholy, long, withdrawing roar. Of course, the bit that people really remember from the poem is how it ends with a terrible warning of a world without faith, which hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain, and we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. That's the Brazier angle. Christine Hamilton's here. You're not a Conservative Big C. Are you a Christian Big C?
I'm a Christian small C.
I'm not sure what the difference is, but OK.
Well, I'm Church of England, and I go to our local church as often as possible. We are one of 8 under one vicar, so we only have one service a month, etc. And if it happens to fall on a Sunday when I'm not there anyway. So, yeah, no, I'm certainly a Christian with a small c. I'm not a massively regular churchgoer. That was brilliant, by the way. I mean, I'm not sure what I can add, but I mean...
We'll try.
Oh, I'm going to. Oh, don't worry, I'm going
to.
to. I mean, let's just keep it very close to home. The Calvin Robinson situation is utterly absurd, and the Archbishop of Canterbury presides over that lot, who have said that Calvin is not a suitable person to be a priest in the Church of England because he isn't woke. I mean, you know, that is absolutely appalling. It is not his job to preside over the decline of the Church of England. It should really well be his job to inspire and to build up the congregations. I mean, it's ridiculous. And you mentioned during COVID, he should have been out there giving a lead. He should have saying the churches will not close, the churches will be here for people, instead of which, as you say, he closed them all, he stopped the Sunday schools, and there he was cowering in the crypt, and then he disappeared off to do a sabbatical. I mean, what sort of leadership is that? Partygate, I really hope we weren't going to mention it, but anyway, Partygate is an incredibly hot political potato. He knows that, and he should have kept his nose out of it.
And he will have advisors, he will have parishioners who'll say, Archbishop, your job is to opine as the leader of the established church. Actually, I suppose the Queen's technically the supreme governor, isn't she? But, you know...
She has got more sense than to interfere.
to interfere. But, you know, there is a role for the church in everyday life, and that includes politics, some will say.
Some would say, well, we call him at home the arch-bedwetter of Canterbury. I mean, he's just a bleeding heart liberal, small L, and I don't think it's his place to opine on Partygate. Let's see what he says when the Keir Starmer-Beergate business is concluded.
Well, Christine, thanks very much indeed. Well, it's time for our debate this hour. 8 universities are under investigation by the higher education watchdog for offering poor quality degrees. The institutions will now be investigated by the Office for Students, which could result in fines being issued or student loan funding being withdrawn. The investigation follows some concern, increasing concern, it's probably fair to say, that students are not getting value for money with some courses, certainly during COVID, some courses offering low levels of graduate employment. So our question, don't apologise for it being one we've often put because it's a real conversation that people are having. Do university degrees still give people who get them a head start in life? Lord Ralph Lucas is an education commentator and the former editor-in-chief of the Good School Guide. And I'm sure Christine Hamilton will have something to say on this one as well. We can be sure of that. Lord Ralph Lucas, we start with you. The numbers are not as emphatic as they used to be. There used to be a very clear correlation between higher education and increased earnings. That's rather broken down.
It's very hard to maintain it when half the population is going to university. You're really just saying all possible employment which could benefit from a university degree now only employs graduates. So there isn't the premium that there used to be for the 1 in 10 that used to be graduates going for that market.
Christine, value for money. University, is it worth the candle?
Absolutely not. No, I mean Tony Blair. What I found fascinating about this debate is that Tony Blair was the one who said that he wanted 50% to go to university, which he's roughly speaking got. His son Ewan Blair, who is a darn sight more cleverer than he is, has instituted this company called Multiverse, which aims to provide an alternative to university so that for people who don't need to go to university, it's like a dating agency, really. They get put in touch with employment opportunities in serious companies, companies like Google or whatever. These are white-collar jobs, and they don't need a university degree, and they don't need to saddle themselves with all the debt. I did a little research about some of the more ludicrous degrees that are out there, and I mean, honestly, I found surf science, i.e. learning how to surf the waves. Not surf the internet, surf the waves. Floral design, the psychology of fashion, hand embroidery, and listen to this one, stand-up comedy. That is at the University of Kent, stand-up comedy. Why do you need to go to university to learn stand-up comedy? Either you can do it or you can't. It's not really something that you can learn at a university. But there we are.
Ralph?
No, I mean, completely agree with Chris. It is ridiculous, and we aren't giving our children the information they should have. We're chucking them in the direction of £50,000 worth of debt, and we're not telling them what comes at the end of it. Is this? I mean, the Office for Students is looking at business and management courses. It ought to be easy to know if they're good. Are the employers saying whoopee when they walk through the doors afterwards? You're not given that information. You're not told what comes afterwards. You're not told how the world views this particular degree. And that ought just to be an obvious basic bit of information to be fair to our children that we're giving them. Does this course give you what you think it ought to give you? I mean, you may remember Sir Ian Livingstone did a report on courses that had computer games in their titles, and the industry reckoned that 15% of those courses were up to scratch. It's the same, I think, in a lot of other areas. Courses that claim to give you a purchase on the real world. I mean, if you study history and you take your chances, let alone classics. But if you're studying business and management, it really ought to be something that gives you an edge in employment.
And Christine, where's the market in this? How could it possibly be right that everybody's paying £9,000, whether they go to a top-flight university or one that isn't?
Well, it's ludicrous. And whether people... I know that university is supposed to be more than just learning your degree subject, etc. It's supposed to be rounded experience, etc., etc., and especially for people who've never been away from home before, all that sort of thing. But, I mean, where is the logic in lumbering yourself with that amount of debt for something that you don't need to be there in the first place? I don't know who decides. It depends on the university. I mean, they're all most of them self-funding institutions, and they make their decisions as to what they charge for this, that and the other, and what the amount of debt, is going to be. But it's madness, utter madness. And who was it who said, I think it was amazingly Enoch Powell, decades and decades ago, who said more means worse. And he was talking about people going to university. It should be an elite occupation to a certain extent. Not as elite as it used to be. I'm all in favour of widening it out. But it ought to be elite subjects.
Christine, Ralph, there we have to leave it. I'm sure the emails will come in God's good time. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. It's time for 5 to 5 as we discuss 5 things that you might want to know about before 5 o'clock. At 5, universal credit fraud is costing the UK taxpayer more than £5 billion a year. The figures reached a record high. The Department for Work and Pensions suggests fraud has increased by almost 3/4 on pre-pandemic levels. Around 3% of all benefit payments affected. They've called the figures, as they might, unacceptable. At 4, the first cases of monkeypox identified in Wales and Northern Ireland. There are now believed to be around 80 cases of the virus in the UK. Health experts say the risk to the population remains low. At 3, ramblers might be using their phones rather than a map to find their way on rural walks. QR codes are set to be introduced to link walkers to a website helping them understand field etiquette and where they can legally walk. The codes that can be scanned by a mobile phone will be government funded and posted on public footpath signs. At 3, the author, Margaret Atwood, has taken a flamethrower to her best-selling book in a stance against cancel culture. The Handmaid's Tale writer created a fireproof, one-of-a-kind edition of the book that cannot be destroyed. She made it. I don't think she made it herself. She probably commissioned its creation. The 82-year-old will sell the book at auction, with the money going to a charity promoting free expression. And at 1, favourite story of the day, German surfer. Look, Christine, look at that. A German surfer has broken the Guinness World Record. I'm sorry if you're listening on radio. Imagine a really, really big wave. The largest wave ridden. Sebastian Steutner caught this 86-foot-high wave off the coast of Portugal. He broke the record in October 2020. It's only just been officially confirmed. Those are 5 things you might want to know before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Christine's still here to take us up to the top of the hour or thereabouts. What caught your ear there, Christine?
Well, again, apologies to those who are only listening, as it were, because the photographs of the surf were absolutely astonishing. You couldn't see the surfer anywhere in them. I wonder if he had a degree in surfing. But there we go. These QR codes for ramblers, the thing that slightly shocked me was the government are going to pay for it. Well, hang on a minute, is that really a serious priority? And I find it shocking that I hate to bang on as an old person, but young people today can't read maps. They depend entirely on sat-nav. They haven't a clue what a map is, and this is just going to make that sort of thing even worse.
I wonder if we're rewiring brains a little bit on that one. It's also true that if you're not using, you don't get lost as often, you don't have rows in the car, because the sat-nav actually is better. But
Excuse me, the sat-nav causes more rows in our car than
you don't have, Christian,
else.
is if you're lucky enough to have a co-passenger and they're looking at the Ordnance Survey map, what you don't get is that stuff that you can't get on sat-nav, which is 3 miles over here there's the ancient ruins of, or whatever it is, Surf World.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Yes.
Anything else caught your ear briefly?
Margaret Atwood, good for her. I thought that was brilliant. It's wonderful PR, not that she needs it, but as a protest against this cancel culture business. We're going to cancel half of Shakespeare and goodness knows what. So good for her.
Yeah.
And she's going to raise some money selling off the flameproof book.
Have you read The Handmaid's Tale?
No, I was hoping you wouldn't ask.
No, sorry.
I haven't
you know
read,
what we need to
I
do?
haven't seen it.
We need to have a little chat before we come on air. Just there are certain things that
Embarrassing questions.
And I don't
to
ask you whether you're a Conservative because you'll embarrass me, and I don't ask you whether you've read Margaret Atwood. Is that a deal?
That's a deal. I haven't. Just don't ask me about football either.
Christine, thanks very much indeed. We'll be focusing on football in the next hour. No, we won't. All the news coming up at 5.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up live at 5, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak has announced new measures to support families in the UK with the cost of living crisis. One of the benefits will see 8 million households on the lowest incomes receive a one-off payment of £650 to pay for the new support, a U-turn on a windfall tax on the profits of energy companies. Economist Julian Jessup on what that means for businesses. The announcement comes 24 hours after the full findings into parties within Downing Street. Yes, we're still banging that drum. Sue Gray released a report yesterday. The pollster Joe Twyman will share his thoughts on whether today's cost of living announcement will take the pressure off the PM and his party. And our debate, I'm asking whether the Archbishop of Canterbury was right to have his say on the Partygate row by saying we need to rediscover good standards in public life. Not the first time Justin Welby's spoken out. We'll discuss that before 6. Alongside me for the next 2 hours, having her say on the stories of the day, the media personality and writer Christine Hamilton. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Good afternoon. The top stories on GB News. The Chancellor says he's announced his £1.5 billion support package to help the cost of living crisis today because we now have more clarity on what's going to happen to energy bills in the autumn. 8 million of the most vulnerable homes will receive a one-off £650 payment, as you've been hearing, with separate one-off payments of £300 to pensioners and £150 to those on disability benefits. The energy bills discount, due to come in from October, will be doubled from £200 to £400, and the requirement to pay it back will also be scrapped. Rishi Sunak also announced a 25% temporary levy on oil and gas firms, which will raise £5 billion over the next year to help tackle the cost of living crisis.
I know things are difficult and people are worried about the next few months. That's why we've announced today £15 billion of new support to help with the cost of living.
And I'm focused on delivering for people, and that's what today was about. And the timing of today is because we now have more clarity about what's going to happen to energy bills in the autumn. We heard from Ofgem earlier this week about the potential scale of the increase, and that's why we took decisive action to provide £15 billion worth of support to help the country get through the challenging months ahead.
As you heard there, £15 billion worth of support. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, criticising the government for taking so long to back what she called Labour's plan.
For months, it has been clear that more was necessary to help people bring their bills down. So what took this government so long? Every day that they have refused to act, £53 million more added to Britain's household bills during this cost of living crisis. This government's dither and delay has cost our country dearly.
Acting Police Commissioner Sir Stephen Howes has defended the Metropolitan Police's investigation of the Partygate scandal. Speaking before the London Assembly's Police and Crime Committee, he said there were full files of evidence behind each fixed penalty notice.
Many of the photographs that we are seeing look bad, and Sue Gray's report has dealt with that. We deal with the law, not what looks bad. And just because there is alcohol present, can I just remind people that the COVID regulations are about breaching COVID regulations. They're not about whether there's drink there or not.
The Crown Prosecution Service has authorised 4 charges of sexual assault against the Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey relating to 3 men. The CPS has also authorised a charge of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. The charges follow a review of the evidence gathered by the Metropolitan Police in a previous investigation. The alleged incidents took place in London and in Gloucestershire between 2005 and 2013. The actor hasn't yet been formally charged, as he isn't in the UK. To the United States now, and the Texas gunman who killed 19 children and 2 teachers was reportedly inside the primary school for up to an hour. The suspect, 18-year-old Salvador Ramos, was armed with an assault rifle when he locked himself in a classroom and opened fire. Just minutes earlier, he'd posted an online message warning he was going to attack. US Senator and lawyer Ed Markey is calling on reforms to gun laws.
Every industrialized country has citizens with mental health issues, but they do not have an epidemic of gun violence in their countries. The difference between the United States and the other countries in the world is that those who want to do harm to their neighbors have access to weapons of mass destruction.
The Foreign Secretary has accused Russia's President Vladimir Putin of holding the world to ransom over food. The Kremlin has rejected claims it blocked grain exports from Ukraine, saying the West created the situation by imposing sanctions. Speaking in Bosnia, Liz Truss said pressure must be maintained against Moscow. And in other news today, a British man's been jailed after admitting he tried to smuggle £160 million worth of cocaine into the UK on a luxury yacht. Andrew Cole from Stockton-on-Tees was aboard when his yacht was stopped 80 miles off the coast of Plymouth. The UK Border Force and the Australian Federal Police recovered more than 2 tonnes of cocaine. The 33-year-old, who's been jailed for 18 years, has links to an international organised crime group. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now let's get back to Colin Brazier.
Nearly 7 minutes past 5. The Chancellor Rishi Sunak has announced plans to give every household in the country £400 off their energy bills as a grant. Outlining new support for what he described as struggling families, he said there are 8 million households currently relying on help through the benefits system. He announced the government will send directly to around 8 million of the lowest income households a one-off cost of living payment worth £650. It'll be in 2 lump sums in July and then in the autumn. The money will be paid directly into people's bank accounts. It will cost taxpayers a total of £5 billion, which is coincidentally the amount the government today said was lost last year in fraudulent universal credit claims in 1 year. Let's turn to the economics fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Julian Jessup, who joins us now, I'm delighted to say. Julian, thanks for your time. Overall impressions of this statement today?
Well, overall, I think it was a pretty good job. In particular, he targeted most of the additional support today at the households that need it most. So that's low-income households and also other vulnerable groups, including pensioners and the disabled. So it's a well-targeted package. I think it'll go a long way towards easing the additional pressures on household budgets over the next few months. And on top of some of the measures he's announced previously, I think it will help us to avoid a recession. There's still some aspects of it I didn't like. In particular, I'm not keen on the windfall tax, which I think was unnecessary and will distort investment decisions. But I think that's a secondary issue to the bigger story, which is that he has provided a substantial amount of support to those who are really struggling to pay their bills at the moment.
Julian, help us avoid a recession. Will it be inflationary?
Well, I understand that concern. I mean, clearly, if the government is injecting more money into the economy, then that will boost demand, and it might mean that the Bank of England wants to raise interest rates a bit more than it otherwise have done. But I think the way that it's been targeted has been quite helpful because, as I say, most of the money will be going to poorer households. What it will basically allow them to do is to continue buying the same amount of energy and other essentials as they were before. It doesn't mean that those households are suddenly going to rush out and spend loads of money on other goods and services. They're simply not going to be in a position to do so. And also, if it does mean the Bank of England raises interest rates a bit more aggressively than before, I actually think that's no bad thing. I think many economists, myself included, think that fiscal policy is too tight. The government needed to spend more and cut taxes, but monetary policy is too loose. So if we get slightly higher interest rates as a result of that, then I think that's a good balance to strike.
What would you say, Julian, to those Conservative backbenchers, a handful who were howling from the backbenches saying this is too redistributive? Saying the principle of saying to a company your profits are only ever provisional, we, the state, reserve the right to nick them from you later on. What do you say to them?
Well, I agree about the concerns over the windfall tax. I think it's sending a very bad signal to businesses that, in particular in an industry like oil and gas, where the profits are very cyclical, they go up and down a lot. If you're sending a signal that anytime you have a good year, you'll be whacked with a sort of unexpected, arbitrary and retrospective tax, I think that's increasing business uncertainty. And the way that he announced it today actually had some additional uncertainty in it as well. It's not clear when this windfall tax will end. And it might also be extended to other companies, including electricity generators, who at the moment don't have any clarity about what their tax position is going to be. So I agree with the backbenchers, if you like, on that. In terms of the redistributive element, yes, I'm no great fan of just giving people money to tide them through problems, but sometimes that's the best thing to do. The government has done other things that are more, if you like, market friendly. We've got the increase in the national insurance threshold coming up soon. That's a tax cut for low earners. Some of the changes to universal credit are effectively tax cuts for low earners as well. And I think that should be the first line of defence against the cost of living crisis. On top of that, very important supply side reforms, including fixing problems in the supply of energy. But at the end of the day, in a crisis as steep and big as we've got now, sometimes simply giving more people money is the best solution.
Julian Jessup of the IEA. Julian, appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Joining us here in the studio now, the co-founder, director of Delta Poll, Joe Twyman, who's been kind enough to come in. Joe, appreciate you coming in. Where are we now in the polling around Partygate in particular?
Well, around Partygate, we really haven't moved very much since the local elections, actually. Before the fines were handed out in the first place, 6 out of 10 people said that Boris Johnson should resign if he received a fine. Then when the fines came out, 6 out of 10 people felt that he should resign having received a fine. And now, after Sue Gray's report, other polling shows that 6 out of 10 people think he should resign as a result of what's happened.
You're out of business. If the polls don't move, you don't get any work.
Well, even a no movement is an interesting finding, I would argue. And so what we've seen is that really the kind of revelations, if you like, that came out yesterday are very much priced in now. And people are in many ways moving on. But that doesn't mean that Partygate doesn't continue to be a concern for people.
Well, don't tell
important.
Christine Hamilton that, because she's bored beyond reckoning with Partygate, aren't
Well,
you?
I would just like to move on, but I mean, that is actually fascinating. About 6 out of 10 hasn't moved on. I just think, you know, we've had enough, and the opposition have done their best, battering away, etc., etc. It really has proved to be a bit of a damp squib. I don't approve of Boris Johnson. I don't approve of the culture in Downing Street, and I'm not defending what went on. It's appalling. But I really do think that we've had our pound of flesh out of that, and can we please move on?
OK,
here's something
I'm keen to move on to today, and I just sense it's a story that's not going to get the attention it deserves, and I'm struck by the coincidental nature of the fact we've got the windfall tax, £5 billion, and on the same day we've heard, but it's not really bubbling away on the media websites, that the amount of fraud in the last year from universal credit, is £5 billion, and the chances of getting much of that money, any of that money back really into the country's coffers is very, very slim. What does your polling tell you about the attitude of people towards that type of fraud?
Well, firstly, people tend to massively overestimate the level of fraud that actually takes place in this country as a percentage of the total amount that's spent on welfare. And so
they think everybody's at it.
They think it's a much bigger problem than it actually is. But at the same time, there is a general recognition that around issues of welfare, whether it's specific benefits or whether it's the general amount, and really around the details, people think that reform is necessary. Now, they can't agree on what that reform should be, but there is a belief that that things should change. And up until now, really, governments of successive colours over decades have struggled with this issue of how to reform welfare in a way that people think is firstly effective and secondly fair, because those are the main things that matter, whether we're talking about reform of welfare or whether we're talking about the changes that have come into effect because of the energy crisis. It's all about these stories, and governments have failed to win over the public when it comes to such issues regarding welfare.
Joe, do people ever come to you discreetly? As somebody who's got the data. I mean, particularly, it seems to me in the last 48 hours we spent a lot of time talking about leadership. Yesterday, Boris Johnson was saying it's good leadership to make sure if somebody's leaving number 10 to go somewhere else that I show good leadership and bid them farewell. I've just had a bit of a rant about the Archbishop of Canterbury, arguably not showing great leadership and getting stuck into politics when he ought to stay clear. Do you get people coming to you and saying, you know, how do I demonstrate my leadership credentials? Am I doing it very well? I mean, you've got your approval ratings. You know, that's a really important barometer of somebody's ability to lead.
Well, in nearly 25 years of political research, I've worked with a number of different politicians of all colours, and some of them have sometimes asked about exactly what constitutes leadership. Because, of course, one person's leader is another person's ignorer of public opinion, and one person's follower of public opinion is another person's lacking in any ideology. And so it's a very narrow path that politicians have to walk in that respect, and it can be difficult at times, particularly when there is no obvious way forward, because the public and even somebody's own party, for instance, may be very divided on issues.
Joe, really appreciate you coming in. Absolutely fascinating. Joe Twyman, thanks very much. We mentioned universal credit. Universal credit fraud hit a record high, 13% in the year to April 2022. It costs the taxpayer more than £5 billion. This is in one year. It marks an increase of almost 3/4 on pre-pandemic fraud levels and a slight rise on the previous year. From the start of the pandemic, the government eased some conditions to allow what amounted to unprecedented numbers of people to access financial help. The chief exec of the Mancunian Way charity is Nick Buckley, who joins us now. Hi to you, Nick. I was keen to talk to you today because I know you are happy. Well, not happy. You're willing to talk about something which I noticed an hour ago with somebody from a charity. There was a sort of reluctance to discuss, and that is something which infuriates a lot of working class folk. That idea that yes, there are people in extreme poverty who need our help. And there are others, whether they're in organised crime or on the fringes of it, or whether they just aspire an opportunity to make a bit of extra cash. And these figures seem to demonstrate that's rising a bit.
First of all, I'm the former chief exec at Mancunian Way, so I'm not working for the charity anymore, just so people don't have a go at the charity. This is just one of those subjects that's a can of worms that nobody really wants to talk about, and politicians really don't want to look into that can because they know what's in there. Fraud in the benefit system is tremendous. I know your guests just said then that the general public overestimate it. And the reason why he thinks they overestimate it, the reason why I know it happens, is the people I speak to. The vast majority of people I've ever spoken to who claim state benefits at some time have been fraudulent. And it may be a small thing, their partner who moves in with them, or they did a bit of extra work and didn't declare it. But it happens all the time. The whole system was fit for purpose 70 years ago. It's not fit for purpose now. And we're still trying to make people work within this system. And it's turning people into beggars. It's not helping them, it's harming them.
Nick, I'm going to come back to you for what you think can be done to reform the system in a second, but I'm going to bring in Christine Hamilton with her thoughts on this one. Christine, beggars, says Nick Buckley. It's strong language, but I always take Nick very seriously because he's walking the walk within the charity work he's done and the people he's worked with.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's down there at the coalface, or was. Beggars is a very strong word, but there are an awful lot of people who live a dependency life and they just expect everything to be provided for them. And you see this is a generational thing, and people grow up into households where their parents, their grandparents, etc. And this idea that the state's going to pay for everything is very, very corrosive. And this is, I said earlier, you see somebody next door in a hard-working household seeing the next-door neighbours getting more than they are, and they never move their arses, if you'll excuse the expression, outside the front door. It just all arrives in a sort of cartload of money, no wonder. But what I don't know is, it's obviously, checking up on all this is expensive, just like means testing is expensive, and there must be some sort of curve which shows that putting more money into checking whether benefits are going in the right place, there'll come a moment when that is money well spent and fraud will go down. Now, that's something for an expert.
The Ofcom regulator, I'm not sure what their language guide is, but maybe I'll just say,
whatever.
Mind your language or something.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Let's go back to Nick Buckley.
Anatomical phrase.
Exactly. Nick, how would you change things? How does reform happen?
First of all, we need to ask the question, what is our benefit system for? But no one can answer that question. What is it for? Is it to make sure people don't starve to death? Is it to make sure that we don't see people living on the streets, which we do anyway? Or is it to make sure we feel better about ourselves, that we chipped into a system? So we need to answer that question. To tackle this now, this is the wrong time because we're in the middle of a crisis. We have to change our welfare system when the country is doing excellent, when we have excess money. Because to fix something costs money. If you've got a hole in your roof, you don't fix it when you're unemployed. You fix it 6 months later when you've got a job, because it's going to cost you money. And we need to look at our system and we need to say, how are we going to improve the lives of people who end up coming into this system? And I want a welfare state, so don't misrepresent me thinking I don't want it. I want to reform it. So let's look at how we're going to improve the lives of these people. We need to pull it all the way back to school, because many schools producing children who are going to go straight onto benefits and remain on there. So how do we break that? How do we break the intergenerational dependency? And it's all about, for me, aspirations and dreams. And once you start signing on and once you're on benefits, all your dreams and aspirations are sucked away, and you end up going, this is all that life can offer me, and I should be grateful for this. Yeah. And it's a shame that we're killing people in this country by ripping away their dreams and aspirations, and they can achieve so much more with a little bit of help. Because us three didn't get where we were today without people helping us and supporting us to get here.
Christine, this might seem an odd thing to say in a world of Twitter, but actually I just wonder whether it's become slightly bad manners to even address this subject. Now, I'm really struck today by the fact we've got this figure, 5 million quid for a windfall tax. Now, we've been discussing that windfall tax for weeks, and the windfall tax in the papers tomorrow will get loads of traction and coverage and acres of newsprint. The 5 billion quid that's gone on universal credit fraud over the last year, I would suggest to both of you, and Christine, give me your thoughts, will get very little attention.
Well, it jolly well ought to get attention. I mean, it's a scandal. It's an absolute scandal that there's that amount of criminal. It's criminal. Criminal fraud in the benefit system. I mean, OK, the odd person, might get away with the odd 20 quid here or there, but it's criminal fraud what's going on. I mean, 5 billion is a huge amount of money. I don't know how many people that represents. That would be interesting. That may be in the figures somewhere, but it ought to get a massive amount of attention because it's something the government could have attended to or should be attending to, and then they wouldn't have had to impose what I think is an iniquitous tax, a windfall tax.
Christine Hamilton, Nick Buckley, thanks both. Oh, the reports that Boris Johnson's prepared to strike a pay deal with the unions to put a stop to strike action this summer. The RMT union says it'll be the biggest rail strike in decades. We will talk to the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin McKenzie, to see what he makes of that. First, we've got the weather for you.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. The skies will clear a little overnight, which should allow a bit more sunshine for most of us tomorrow, but it will also allow temperatures to fall, so a little fresh first thing on Friday morning. Here's the bigger picture. High pressure to the south, low pressure to the north. In between, a fair few weather fronts drifting across the country. They've been bringing a lot of clouds today. This one is edging away to the south, bringing drizzly conditions and a lot of mist across the southwest, but otherwise pulling away, allowing breaks in the cloud to allow it to turn quite chilly. We will keep showers coming into northern and western parts of Scotland overnight and a fairly brisk wind here. Temperatures dropping where we've got the clear skies and lighter winds across the heart of the country down to single figures. Not far off freezing in some rural spots, so a chilly start to Friday, but by and large a fine day to come for most of us. Still some showers across Scotland, mostly north of the central belt, and even here they will tend to ease through the day, but still a few heavy ones possible. From the central belt southwards then, it's looking mostly dry, fine with good spells of sunshine. A warmer feel as well, certainly in the south, 21, maybe 22 Celsius. During Friday evening, temperatures will drop quite sharply. The showers, though, will continue to fade from northern Scotland, so for most it's going to be dry and fine with clear skies as we head into the weekend. That's going to, again, allow things to be quite chilly on Saturday morning, but most of us will have a fine, bright, blue sky day on Saturday. Certainly lots of sunshine in the morning. The cloud will bubble up a little through the day. Small chance of a few showers in northeast Scotland, very slim chance of a shower over eastern England as well. But I say, for the vast majority, it's dry and bright on Saturday. Temperatures not spectacular, but feeling pleasant in the sunshine. Quite a cool feel again in the northeast with a fairly brisk wind. And for most of us, Sunday will be the cloudier day of the two this weekend and feeling cooler as well. Bye for now.
On GB News, we're celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee with 4 days of special coverage between the 2nd and the 5th of June. Join us live up and down the country, sharing your memories from Her Majesty's extraordinary reign. Please send in your stories by emailing us at jubilee@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews. We can't wait to hear what you have to say. GB News is the People's Channel.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Reports today, Boris Johnson's prepared to strike a pay deal with unions to stop a mass strike of railway staff. Senior rail industry figures say that the Prime Minister is keen for an agreement, but the Treasury will not grant an exemption to lift the public sector pay cap to avoid the most potent rail strike, arguably in a generation. The disagreement sparked a new row, allegedly, between number 10 and 11, with a rail industry source accusing the Treasury of, quote, King Canute-like behaviour in trying to resist the demands. Let's turn to the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, who joins us. Well, he would have joined us if he was sitting there, but what a lovely view out of his window. Christine Hamilton's alongside me. That was one of the funniest things that's happened to me in telly.
I'm back.
Kelvin, welcome to you.
Hello, Kelvin.
We took a completely different shot of somebody's empty seat, but we're glad you're there. Should we talk about the rail strike?
Yes, we could talk about the rail strike. Can I just pour a bucket all over Boris and Sunak for the handout?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you about that. I had a feeling you might have something
to the middle classes, by the way, which I feel almost as strongly as I do about the RMT. A shocking decision. But on the RMT, the idea that Boris wants to hand out money we haven't got to a collection of people who have bent us over a chair and are giving us the most tremendous rogering. I have no idea what has happened to Boris lately. I have no idea whether he's still a Conservative or not. But what I do know is our country is skint and we haven't got the money to hand out to blackmailers who are saying we're going to paralyse our nation. I remember the miners' strike of the 80s where they did the same thing based on heating, and we took them on and we defeated them. And Rupert Murdoch defeated the printers. The railway workers have to be defeated. And if they're not defeated, all I can see is a queue about 8 miles long of state workers saying we want the same handout that the rail workers got. Let them paralyse the railways. America gets on very well without any railways. We proved for 18 months, 2 years that we didn't need the railways, although we paid the railway workers nearly $16 billion in furlough money. This is a matter of a trial of strength between a democracy and a group of people who want to literally pay themselves 11, 12, 15% and go on to a 3-day week or whatever it is that they want to do. We are not paying. Boris, are you listening? We're not paying. We haven't got the money. And we weren't helped today by you handing out literally billions to the middle classes. I understand paying the poor, right? I understand even the people on universal credit fiddling us, the poor. But I do not understand how we can afford to literally pay out probably what looks like the thick end of 8 billion quid to the middle classes who are used to cutting down on their energy. They've cut down on that. They're going to Egypt and they're not going to Greece, and they're going to Aldi's, and they're not going to Waitrose. We haven't got the money. We haven't got the money for the railway workers. Our country is skint. We're on the edge of going into recession. The railways should simply be shut down. After all, they were nationalised because they were losing so much money. So why not just call it a day?
Well, arguably, Kelvin, because Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, has painted the government into a corner by saying, look, you can't have a strike because if the railways don't work, we can't move freight trains and all the valuable food that's on them will rot and we'll sort of steady starve.
Fine. We just call in. We call in. I tell you what, call in all the railway workers in the Ukraine. Call in all the bosses. Call in all the troops. Keep the freight going. Keep the consumer. Unfortunately, we'll have to make do and mend. That's what our nation is about. It's not about giving in to blackmail by a collection of communists, right? After all, one of their leaders has been a lifelong communist, right? And also by an apologist for our friend Mr. Putin, right? I have nothing in common with the railway workers. They're just trying it on. And what disappoints me is that we have it in a Conservative, yes, a Conservative Prime Minister who seems to have forgotten what being a Conservative is about.
Well, Kelvin Mackenzie, just hold that position and hold that thought for a second. Christine Hamilton's here. I'm just going to put that to her. There are some people who say, I suspect Kelvin Mackenzie is one of them, that Boris Johnson likes to be popular. And that means he's not prepared to make the tough decisions that someone like Baroness Thatcher was.
Absolutely. Of course he wants to be popular. Well, that was one of Margaret Thatcher's saving graces. She didn't worry about being popular. She just wanted to do the right thing. Kelvin mentioned Arthur Scargill. I mean, let's go back to the days of the miners. Thatcher saw them off. And if Boris doesn't stand up to these rail workers, as Kelvin said, it is just going to be a domino effect. Why should they get the money any more than the health workers or whatever? It's absolutely ridiculous. And do you remember Ronald Reagan, when the air traffic controllers were going to go on strike? He said, right, sack the lot of them. They went back to work very quickly.
Boris,
Boris
is proving a disappointment.
We've got about a minute left, Kelvin. I can tell you're really cross.
I'm furious with Boris about Partygate, not because it was a big event or anything like that, but listening to a Conservative Prime Minister saying, sorry. Why the hell didn't he think about all this while it was going on, right? He talks about leadership. He showed no damn leadership when he saw everybody was on the sauce and throwing up and God knows what. It would have been the talk of Number 10. So actually, I don't believe that people are raging mad about it. I'm raging mad about the fact that he's imperiled a Conservative government by his own actions. And what I'd like to see from him is actually, I'd like to see him from the days when he was editing The Spectator, when he believed in this, he believed in that, he believed in the other. He's abandoned it all. He's been captured by the fact that he thinks he's not going to be elected. I guarantee he won't be elected, by the way things are right now. He now thinks the answer is, let's give money to everybody. Oh, you're not going to work for 2 years? That's all right, we'll give you a load of money. You're going to go on strike? We'll give you a load of money. You know, our energy prices have gone through the roof. I tell you what, you're the middle classes. You don't know how to cut your budget, but I tell you what, I'll give you the money. He thinks there is a bloody money tree. He's supposed to be a Conservative. He's not Starmer.
Okay.
He's not Corbyn. He's supposed to be somebody who cares about the value of the pound.
Kelvin, you've hit the top note there, and I'm not sure who Roger is, but thanks very much indeed for your contribution. Christine, have
I just got time?
Yes, you have. Go on, 10 seconds.
If the Tories go on implementing a socialist manifesto, why are people going to vote for them? Let's have the real thing instead. Let's vote Labour. I mean, they've got to stand up and be Tories, and let's start by standing up to the rail workers.
Christine, Kelvin, we've got to leave it there. Appreciate it. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up next, big topic of the day, for me at least, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Was he right? We're talking about Partygate again, for heaven's sake. Was he right, Justin Welby, to take a pop at the Prime Minister? We'll be discussing that. First, latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The top stories. Well, as you've been hearing, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has announced a £5 billion tax on oil and gas companies to help families struggling through the cost of living crisis. Every household will receive £400 discount from their energy bills, which won't need to be repaid. The lowest income earners will be given £650 in 2 lump sums in July and in the autumn. And pensioners will receive a one-off payment of £300. Then, in September, 6 million people on disability benefits will receive a payment of £150.
I know things are difficult and people are worried about the next few months. That's why we've announced today £15 billion of new support to help with the cost of living. And I'm focused on delivering for people, and that's what today was about. And the timing of today is because we now have more clarity about what's going to happen to energy bills in the autumn. We heard from Ofgem earlier this week about the potential scale of the increase, and that's why we took decisive action to provide £15 billion worth of support to help the country get through the challenging months ahead.
Meanwhile, the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, criticised the government for taking so long to back what she called Labour's plan.
For months, it has been clear that more was necessary to help people bring their bills down. So what took this government so long? Every day that they have refused to act, £53 million more added to Britain's household bills during this cost of living crisis. This government's dither and delay has cost our country dearly.
Meanwhile, in other news today, the Crown Prosecution Service has authorised 4 charges of sexual assault against the Hollywood actor Kevin Spacey relating to 3 men. It's also authorised a charge of causing a person to engage in sexual activity without consent. The charges follow a review of the evidence gathered by the Metropolitan Police in a previous investigation. The actor has not yet been formally charged as he isn't in the UK. Lincolnshire Police have fined a university worker £90 for throwing eggs at a statue of Baroness Margaret Thatcher. Jeremy Webster, Deputy Director at the University of Leicester's Attenborough Arts Centre, was seen throwing the eggs shortly after the memorial was installed in Grantham on the 15th of May. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. Colin Brazier will be here in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Top stories for you this afternoon. The Chancellor's announced a raft of new measures to support families with the cost of living crisis. In a statement of House of Commons, Rishi Sunak said all households will receive a £400 discount on their energy bills, with 8 million of the lowest income families also to receive a one-off payment of £650. A temporary windfall tax on the profits of oil and gas companies will help fund the payments. A U-turn decision from the Conservative government, which I think it's fair to say Kelvin Mackenzie, former editor of The Sun, was furious about. 2 more Tory MPs have withdrawn their support for Boris Johnson in the wake of Sue Gray's report into Downing Street lockdown parties. The announcements by John Barron and David Simons follow a similar call by their backbench colleague Julian Sturdy yesterday. And the first cases of monkeypox confirmed in Wales and Northern Ireland takes the number of infections in the UK to 80. The outbreak of the virus has affected 19 countries, it's thought, across the world. Now then, was the Archbishop of Canterbury right to criticise, indirectly, the Prime Minister over Partygate? Justin Welby waded into the row by saying, quote, "We need to rediscover good standards in public life." Archbishop Welby said the report, the Sue Gray report, shows culture, behaviour and standards in public life matter. He said we need to be able to trust our national institutions in difficult periods. We're asking, was the Archbishop right to criticise the Prime Minister over Partygate? We're joined by Senior Fellow at the Theos think tank, Nick Spencer, and here in the studio, the writer Christine Hamilton has something to share on this one as well. Nick, is it perfectly reasonable for a frontline senior cleric to take part in a political conversation like this?
I think it is reasonable. I think it's actually necessary, really. We have an established church, and there has a very long history of getting politically involved. There are obvious difficult lines to draw there in terms of what's political and what's party political. But in this particular instance, seeing as the discussion was so clearly ethical, I think Welby was entirely right to get involved.
Christine Hamilton.
Well, I mean, I don't agree, because I think this Partygate business is so clearly party political. It's a party political hot potato, and I think actually he should have kept out of it. Yes, he can comment on, moral matters and moral issues, but he really should, I'd have thought, have realised that this was one area not to mention, Just save it for something else.
Well, it would be party political if Welby, say, reserved all his criticism for Boris Johnson, and said nothing at all, say, if the Durham police found Keir Starmer guilty for having broken rules. That would clearly be a party political thing. I imagine the Archbishop would apply the same criticism across the political spectrum. If he didn't, that would be problematic. But Partygate was a profoundly ethical issue, and he's certainly right to comment on it. When staffers seem to be treating cleaners and security men and women in Number 10 with contempt, as the Sue Gray report seemed to suggest, that's a very serious and rather upsetting issue, and I think the Archbishop of Canterbury was entirely right to point it out.
I just wish he would spend a bit more time leading the Church of England, stopping the congregations walking out of the door instead of into the door. A little bit more spiritual guidance and spiritual uplift, I would have thought, were his preserve. Should be.
I don't work at Lambeth. I've only been there a few times in the last 5 years or so. I can tell you the Church of England is very concerned about stopping people from walking out the door. I suspect that occupies the majority of his time. It's just that this is the stuff that gets noticed.
Well, I'm just going to make a point about what does get noticed by, the wretched media, and I can think of a couple of instances recently. And I know, if you're a high-profile figure, Nick, you're going to make missteps, you're going to misspeak from time to time. But when COP, for instance, said that climate change was worse than the Holocaust, remarks he later clarified, that wasn't great, was it?
No. I mean, broadly speaking, if you're in public life, never reference the Holocaust unless you're talking about the Holocaust. I think it's a very good rule of thumb. That was clearly, and he did apologise for it. But there's a broader issue here, which is that, Beckett attacks King is always going to be news. It was news in the 12th century, it's news in the 21st century. Actually, we like a bit of a spat, partly because we don't want our politics just to be functional. We want it to be ethical, and we quite like it when religious figures roll up their sleeves and get involved in political free-for-all. They sometimes get it wrong, and they have to acknowledge that. But actually, it makes for quite a healthy political debate.
To me, it would have been good if he'd got a little bit more involved in political debate during COVID. Instead of just shutting down the churches, shutting down Sunday schools, he cowered in the crypt at Canterbury, and then he went off on a sabbatical. The churches should have remained open. He should have stood up for them, and he should have said, no, I am not closing churches. If you want to send the police to do it, yes. But they were just only too keen to close them down when people needed spiritual guidance and help, and they needed somewhere to go and reflect on all the horrors that were going on around them.
Well, see, I knew we'd find something we agree on there. That's good. So I don't think he was. I don't think he was cowering in the crypt, but I do think that there was a strong argument. I know. But I do think there was a strong argument for keeping the churches open during COVID. I mean, the churches in that regard serve two purposes. They're places of community and worship and public and community service, but they're also places of quiet reflection. Boy, did people need places of quiet reflection where they could try and get a pretty traumatic year into perspective. But I think they probably acknowledged that actually closing them down was probably a mistake.
Nick, can I just talk about how woke, I mean, you probably dread us getting into this, but I want to get into it a little bit finally. I was looking at a tweet from Sheffield Cathedral yesterday, affirming prayer vigil. They say, join us, you were talking about period of prayer and reflection, affirming all that God has created us to be, and then it's got the trans flag. And I mean, the problem with affirming that is that you, in trying to be inclusive to some people, you really alienate others.
That's true. I mean, if you're going to say anything even vaguely contentious in a society, a liberal, plural society like ours, you're always going to upset people, and that comes with the territory. If you're an established church, that gives you a challenge, because on the one hand, you're kind of holding the ring, constitutionally speaking, and at the same time, you're getting into the ring and getting involved. Historically, the churches have been criticised. I did work on Archbishop William Temple. He was a great wartime archbishop. Reading his archives at Lambeth Palace, loads and loads of letters, people writing to him absolutely indignant about his support for what would become the welfare state. This is not a new thing. Historically, in the last 100 years or so, Church of England has tended to veer a little bit left on economics and a little bit right on social issues. Now, whether that's going to continue in the 21st century, that's a very open debate.
Yeah, I think I know the answer to that question already. Nick Spencer, really good to join us, and Christine Hamilton, thanks for your thoughts as well. We're familiar with signposts on rural walks, but what about looking for QR codes instead? The government's set to pay for. Imagine if Kelvin Mackenzie was listening to this, he'd be furious. Scannable codes to help ramblers understand farmers' fields and where they should and shouldn't walk. The measure would provide more information for visitors about farmers' work, as well as reducing conflict by making sure they are aware of how to behave responsibly. Let's turn to David Bean from the Countryside Alliance. David, hi to you. QR codes.
Not a bad idea, I think. I mean, clearly there are, as technology evolves, going to be new thoughts about how we can and how people who are involved in the countryside can get the right information across to people who want to visit it about the way that it is appropriate to behave. Now, obviously, the Countryside Code is nothing new, and I think all of us can be very keen to promote that and to promote people who want to go out into nature, as it's very right that they should do, learning about how the best ways are to behave when accessing land. I think we saw during the lockdown period, and by no means maliciously, but a lot of people were going onto land and that they really shouldn't have been accessing. And it can cause problems for the farmers.
I'm getting quite annoyed if somebody asked them not to. I mean, I'm thinking back, and I'm sure you've thought about the incident that Jeremy Clarkson drew a lot of attention to, of a 70-year-old farmer in his tractor, and somebody threw a rock and injured him, threw a rock at his head, because he had the temerity to point out to somebody that they ought not to be walking on his crop.
Yes, absolutely. And I think you will find the small minority of incidents that really are motivated by stupidity and ignorance. But I think that actually, if you look at the wider scene, when people are behaving in a way that doesn't really match up what is needed in terms of protecting farming activity, protecting the wildlife that should be inhabiting farms as well, generally it's not malicious. And so that's why the provision of more information and looking at innovative ways of getting that information across to people can make a positive contribution.
David, thanks very much indeed for your time. David Bean there from the Countryside Alliance. Christine Hamilton's alongside me. Christine, thoughts briefly?
Well, anything that helps people enjoy the country, understand about the country and find their way if they're lost is a good thing. I just hope it doesn't see the absolute end of anybody carrying a map and a compass and doing it the proper way. But yes, I approve of them.
OK. Now, here's a story that I think is probably the best story of the day, actually, in some respects. The pictures are extraordinary. German surfer broken the Guinness World Record for riding the largest recorded wave. There it is, my goodness. And apologies again if you're a radio listener. It's a whopper. Sebastian Steutner caught this 86-foot-high wave off the coast of Portugal. Do you know why the waves are so big there? Christine?
No, why?
It's very deep,
Something to do
3
with the
miles
Atlantic?
deep. Yes, 3 miles deep, and then suddenly it comes up very sharply in this, off the coast of Portugal. Anyway, he broke the record in October 2020. It's only just been confirmed. Let's turn to Pete Abel from King Surf School in Newquay. Where else? Pete, welcome to you. 86 feet, for goodness sake.
Oh, you can't imagine it, can you? We'd only dream of going out in waves that big.
How dangerous would that be? I mean, if you was wiped out by that wave, you're a long time reaching the surface, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. It could be minutes and you could be resurfacing and then get hit by the second wave and held down for just the same amount of time. So it's life-threatening, definitely.
What is it about this little area off the Portuguese coast. I mentioned the fact that it's 3 miles deep, and then suddenly it rises very sharply. What's the physics at work? Why does that then create these gigantic waves?
Yeah, well, Portugal's a long way away from America, so there's a lot of fetch. So these big low pressures come all the way from America, and by the time they reach our shores, they've gathered in momentum and got bigger and bigger. Some of these swells can reach up to sort of 84 foot, 86 foot, as Sebastian's showing you there in the image. By the time it arrives at the beach, it goes from really, really deep water into almost sort of 10 foot of water and jacks up sort of so much higher than it would if it was just arriving on our beaches here in Cornwall.
How would he? I mean, Pete, Pete, what's the biggest wave you've surfed? And when you're in it, how do you not get overwhelmed by the sheer scale of what you're looking at?
Well, yeah, embarrassingly, a big wave in Cornwall, really out the window here, would be about 6 foot, so, just over head high. We get excited about swells like that. So I can't fathom what must have been going on in Sebastian's mind as he was taking about 30 seconds just to reach, from the top of the wave to the bottom of the wave. It must have been so exhilarating.
And I read that out there in Portugal, they're being towed out by jet skis to sort of turn around things really quickly. Is that quite common practice?
Yeah, that's true. One of the reasons they use the jet skis is because they can't generate enough speed and momentum to catch the wave themselves. They need to be towed in at a certain speed. And the other thing about having the jet ski there is if it does go wrong, someone can quickly whip in and grab you and pull you back on and get you out of danger. But, a lot of respect to the jet ski riders themselves as well, because they're putting themselves out there. And sometimes these rescues don't go right and they both end up wiping out and in trouble. So it's a team. It's definitely a team thing.
Pete, just a thought filing before we let you go about how many people are using surf schools like yours in Newquay right now. I was reading, in fact, I was in St Ives last week, and I was reading subsequently that the numbers of domestic UK holidays this year is going to be down for obvious reasons, post-COVID. People are desperate to go abroad. What are the numbers looking like where you are?
Oh, we're definitely feeling it, actually. And a lot of people are waiting till the last minute, so we can't quite gather the numbers we had last year. But we're seeing the beaches are quiet now, and they weren't last year. This bank holiday coming is going to be a great one, but it's definitely not the one we were hoping for. So I think Cornwall's outpriced itself slightly, and people are going abroad again, definitely.
Interesting, really interesting. Pete Abel, nice to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. We're going to talk to Michelle Jubilee now about what's coming up on her show. Michelle, big waves?
Oh, Colin, listening and watching to that. I wish that I was on a beach in Newquay on a surfboard, don't you? Let's run off together after the show, do a bit of surfing. Anyway, I digress. Coming up on my show today, Rishi Sunak. He's announced his new measures to help people. I wonder, where do the viewers sit with this? Are you happy with what you've heard? Was it enough? Do you want more? Would it ever be enough? And also, ambulances, apparently. We're heading for a Titanic moment, Colin. Within weeks, some services are saying that they won't be able to respond to 999 calls. Also, as well, I want to look at what sex, relationship and gender lessons are being taught in schools as well.
Michelle, lovely. Thanks very much indeed. I'm not running off with anybody, apart from Michelle Hamilton. Christine Hamilton might be up
Absolutely,
there
we're off after the show.
The surf chap.
I know. Well, I 100% was thinking what Michelle was obviously thinking. Lucky devil, if that's your job. I mean, wow. But surfing can be highly dangerous by the time you...
I'm tempted. Have you done it?
Well, I can't say yes when I've just seen those pictures of that guy. But yes, I have in a very modest way. By the time you realise you're in trouble, it's too late. And if you get sucked under, it can be incredibly scary.
I mean, that's nerves of steel, isn't it? And just on the point about... I heard you making noises off about UK tourism, that the numbers will be down this year.
Well, what was interesting was what he said, that Cornwall's priced itself out of the market. And this, of course, is one of the problems, is that people now can go so quickly, they can get themselves to Portugal or wherever, all these fairly close European destinations. You're there for less than the cost of the petrol to get down to Land's End.
Though we ought to say scores of flights were cancelled this morning. It persists in being a problem, the number of people to work at the airports and baggage handlers and all the rest of it. Christian Hamilton, as ever, thanks so much for coming in. Really appreciated it. And we'll bring you the rest of the day's news coming up next. Stand by, Michelle's here.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. The skies will clear a little overnight, which should allow a bit more sunshine for most of us tomorrow, but it will also allow temperatures to fall, so a little fresh First thing on Friday morning, here's the bigger picture. High pressure to the south, low pressure to the north. In between, a fair few weather fronts drifting across the country. They've been bringing a lot of cloud today. This one is edging away to the south, bringing drizzly conditions and a lot of mist across the southwest, but otherwise pulling away, allowing breaks in the cloud to allow it to turn quite chilly. We will keep showers coming into northern and western parts of Scotland overnight and a fairly brisk wind here. Temperatures dropping where we've got the clear skies and lighter winds across the heart of the country down to single figures. Not far off freezing in some rural spots, so a chilly start to Friday, but by and large a fine day to come for most of us. Still some showers across Scotland, mostly north of the central belt, and even here they will tend to ease through the day, but still a few heavy ones possible. From the central belt southwards then, it's looking mostly dry, fine with good spells of sunshine. A warmer feel as well, certainly in the south, 21, maybe 22 Celsius. During Friday evening, temperatures will drop quite sharply. The showers, though, will continue to fade from northern Scotland, so for most it's going to be dry and fine with clear skies as we head into the weekend. That's going to, again, allow things to be quite chilly on Saturday morning, but most of us will have a fine, bright, blue sky day on Saturday. Certainly lots of sunshine in the morning. The cloud will bubble up a little through the day. Small chance of a few showers in northeast Scotland, very slim chance of a shower over eastern England as well. But I say, for the vast majority, it's dry and bright on Saturday. Temperature's not spectacular, but feeling pleasant in the sunshine. Quite a cool feel again in the northeast with a fairly brisk wind. And for most of us, Sunday will be the cloudier day of the two this weekend and feeling cooler as well. Bye for now.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.